Modular Maritime Metropolis, a review on Sustainable Floating City. Abstract. This paper presents the study concerning floating cities in terms of energy efficiency, performance, and making strides mindfulness to construct them. As it is known, environmental issues such as rapid growth of human populace, exhaustion of the energy sources, global warming and increasing water level has influenced the ecosystems and biological diversity, which needs to be considered with the sustainable design methodologies and innovative arrangements. The concept of sustainable floating architecture can be presented as an innovative solution to climate change challenges within the built environment. This paper presents a review of the principal features of a floating city that has a major impact on global energy supplies and alternative renewable energy sources. Development of floating city needs the implementation of modern innovation, social and community information. The thought of living and working on water itself is neither new, consequently modern advances and techniques are reviewed that were introduced within the design era prior. By and large, this research work presents that floating buildings can be a curious way to combine ocean vitality assets and floating design. Moreover, this concept energizes the utilization of ocean vitality assets and integrating them into the design. Keywords: floating cities, energy efficient, ocean colonization, ecology, sustainable architecture. Introduction. Since late 18th century, urban populace has been developed exponentially, to the point that's anticipated that by 2050, 64% to 86% of the world populace will take off the wide open to settle in urban environment. Excluding seas, only 1/8 of soil surface is assumed to be appropriate for people to live in, and in spite of the truth we are right now occupying only 5% of it, the sum of available building ground within the vicinity of urban settlements is lacking. Frequently, when nations and cities don't have space to construct facilities for the quick-growing population, they attempt to amplify to the ocean with the use of land reclamation. Tragically, land reclamation isn't continuously feasible, either because the water profundity is as well high or since there's not sufficient accessible sand for it. On the other hand, whereas expanding urbanization faces architects and engineers with a new problematic, global warming represents another issue designers should consider for future and present day's venture. As anticipated impacts of the global average temperature rise, we are expecting ocean level rise, deserts development, and alter in precipitations, with extreme precipitation that can put cities confronting water at a higher chance of surges. Both expanding urbanization and climate alter are encouraging designers and engineers to utilize water as building arrive, adopting floating structures as a favorable solution. Drifting engineering not only could help coastline cities to create through oceans and confront ocean level rise, but presents numerous other positive angles that can't be overlooked. A few of them incorporate security in case of storms and surges, feasible vitality arrangement through water, e.g. wave vitality, adaptable urban components, and the possibility to move the structure according to the exterior environment conditions. All these aspects make designers believe that sooner or later, building on water would get to be a part of standard structural planning, within the same way tall rise buildings became a typical feature of fast-growing cities in the 20th century. Fig. 1 Aerial view of sustainable floating city. 2 Methodology. A. Design, the outline of a floating city. The plan is anchored within the Sustainable Advancement Objectives, channeling streams of vitality, water, food, and squander to form an outline for a measured sea city. Coasting maintainable city is planned to develop, change and adjust naturally over time, advancing from neighborhoods, to town, to cities with the possibility of scaling. The city would comprise of a collection of associated stages, varying plans, each of which would serve a part in supporting the coasting metro. They are defined by the agglomerations of elements, buildings, public spaces, streets, and landscape. 1 stage would house submerged gardens for growing seafood, whereas another would hold natural resource productions. Inward stages would house communal offices for programs like education, culture, exercise, and healthcare. Similar to modular development seen on Arrive, the framework of these drifting cities would be able to be dismantled and reconfigured by planners for proceeded advancement. All buildings within the city would too be built at a low stature to play down harm from climate occasions, up to 5 stories to create a low center of gravity and resist wind. The spread over of the resilient and feasible floating city is estimated to be of 75 hectares. B. Technology. To keep settlements afloat, architects and engineers would use huge pontoon structures filled with air to supply buoyancy to the stages. These stages would be hexagonal and circular to cover the ideal space and interface more to community. The city would not be coasting unreservedly, but would instead be moored to the seafloor and tied down off the coast of a major city on the mainland. Ideally, these coasting cities would inevitably make up a circular range of communities sustainably harnessing normal assets to supply energy, nourishment, water, and other materials. 1. How the city infrastructure floats. Pontoon-type coasting structures lie on the sea level like a giant plate drifting on water. Pontoon-type floating structures are appropriate for utilization as in calm waters, habitually insides in an inlet or a tidal lake and near to the shoreline. Large pontoon-type coasting structures have been named megafloats by Japanese engineers. Megafloats are floating structures with at slightest one of its length estimations more vital than 60 m, implying to Fig. 2. A megafloat system comprises of a very huge pontoon floating structure, b. mooring office to keep the floating structure in put, c. an access bridge or coasting street to induce the floating structure from shore, and d. a breakwater, more regularly than not required in case the essential wave stature is more noteworthy than 4 m, for decreasing wave qualities affecting the coasting structure. 2. Design loads. In the design of VLFSs, very large floating structures, the taking after loads are to be considered: dead load, hydrostatic pressure, counting buoyancy, live load, unusual loads, such as influence loads due to collision of ships with the floating structure, soil weight on mooring systems such as dolphins, wind stack, impacts of waves, counting swell, impacts of seismic tremors, counting dynamic water weight, impacts of temperature modify, impacts of water current, impacts of tidal alter, impacts of seabed development, impacts of developments of heading, snow load, impacts of tsunamis, impacts of storm surges, transport waves, seaquake, break stack, erection load, effects of drift ice and ice weight, impacts of drifting bodies, and impacts of marine growths, corrosion and contact. The above table shows the parameters that are considered in the design of the platform superstructure. 4. The anatomy of floating cities. The sea offers a modern wilderness for our lodging needs. Underneath appearing a sea of how a floating city innovation works, what features shape them, and how they might benefit our urban and environmental future. Each platform is devoted to a specific function that helps sustain the city. Food. Farms, a framework of aeroponic and aquaponic systems, offer assistance grow natural produce. 3D sea cultivating, vertical submerged living spaces develop food and clean ocean waters. Biorock reefs, man-made structures give living space recovery, tropical storm defense, and an environment for seafood. Energy. Sun-powered boards, light is collected on building tops to supply 20% more clean control. Wave energy gadgets, the mechanical energy of waves is changed over into power. Vertical wind turbines, sea winds are changed over into energy. Water. Renewable desalination, the framework employments sun-oriented and wind control to form salt water drinkable. Dehumidifiers, climatic dampness is collected and filtered for afterward use. Wave converters, wave vitality is changed into warm energy. Treatment centers, wastewater is treated for afterward utilize rather than being discharged as pollution. Heat trade, cold and warm water from the sea can be utilized for HVAC systems. Public collection, precipitation is accumulated through climatic water collectors, housetops, and climate tiles in open areas. Design. Open housetop, fan-like plan is utilized to self-cool and gives room for sun-powered panels. Shared portability, shared roadways and benefit centers suit electric vehicles, robots, bicycles, and pedestrians. Close-knit plan, Plan permits for 60% of trips to be made with eco-friendly transportation. Mixed-use spaces, each stage gives a space for living, working, and gathering. Local materials, building materials are sourced locally to make tough and carbon-negative infrastructure. Net Zero Plan, a framework of sun-based defenders and cross-ventilation simplifies building cooling frameworks. Zero waste. Waste collection, pneumatic chutes collect reusable things, recyclables, returns, laundry, and nourishment waste. Washing centers and digesters, all waste can be changed over into repurposed things or compost. Trade center points, treated things are accumulated from waste for community sharing. C. Materials. The materials utilized for the floating body may be steel, or concrete or steel concrete composite, and the important determinations ought to be taken after. Since watertightness of concrete is imperative to dodge or constrain erosion of the support, either watertight concrete or seaward concrete should be utilized. High-performance concrete containing fly ash and silica smolder is most appropriate for floating structures. The impacts of crawl and shrinkage are considered as it were when the pontoon are dry, and thus not considered once the pontoon are launched within the ocean. Concrete platform take the name of caissons and can be closed, opened, pneumatic and / or filled with a lightweight and buoyant foam, like ESP, expanded polystyrene foam. Steel utilized for coasting structures might fulfill the fitting standard specifications, such as the Technological Standard and Commentary of Port and Harbor Facilities 1999. Titanium could be the best material choice among all metals, as presents the same strength of steel but with 60% less of its density and incredible corrosion resistance due to its capacity to create oxide film on its surface. In contrast, all communities regardless of measure will prioritize locally sourced materials for building development, including fast-growing bamboo that has 6 times the tensile strength of steel, a negative carbon impression, and can be developed on the neighborhoods themselves. Coasting cities can be pre-assembled on shore and towed to their last location, diminishing development costs. This combined with the low cost of leasing space on the sea makes a reasonable show of living. These components mean that reasonable lodging can be quickly sent to coastal megacities in critical require. 3 environmental beneficial outcomes. 1. Protection from natural disasters. Because they would be built on the water, floating city structures would keep up a lower center of gravity, securing them from solid waves, surges, tsunamis, and indeed storms. The utilization of locally sourced inventive building materials would permit the structures to self-repair over time and withstand common cruel climate conditions. 2. Climate change solution. Climate change debilitates end of the numerous communities. 90% of the world's biggest cities are arranged near a body of water. To form things more regrettable, ocean levels are anticipated to rise by at slightest 26 inches by the end of the century. Due to the buoyant design, drifting cities would give secure, climate-resilient lodging for flood-stricken communities. Additionally, the positioning of the platforms in a drifting city could cast shadows on the surface of the water, making a difference to lower sea temperatures that have risen as a result of climate alter. 3. Housing alternative for crowded cities. By 2030, it's expected that 60% of the world's populace will possess cities. As cities gotten to be packed and living conditions progressively undesirable, urban organizers are examining modern lodging arrangements like 3D printed homes. A recently discovered capacity to construct homes on the ocean's surface seems increment accessible lodging space and offer assistance to populate stuffed cities. As cities ended up more swarmed, lodging will moreover get to be progressively troublesome to manage. Drifting cities would give a relief from the lodging crunch, especially in cities with nearby governments that are willing to contribute in seaward lodging. Construction matched with the move fetched of renting space on the sea would make a reasonable model of living. 4. Renewable sources. Drifting cities would utilize resources from local sun-based vitality, recycling water, and nourishment generation to be completely self-reliant. The open sea would give a copious, undiscovered source of both water and sun-based vitality, which may well be saddled for utilize with modern advances like high-tech aquifers and purifiers. Floating communities would also be able to produce their own deliver and food from on-land ranches and submerged gardens. This would permit these communities to decrease squander and transport by creating the food fundamental to bolster their tenants. 5. Low environmental impact. At last, coasting buildings would play a key part in diminishing CO2 emissions within the built environment. This whole concept incorporates limitations prohibiting tall carbon-emitting cars or trucks, indeed waste trucks. Instead, pneumatic waste tubes would be utilized to transport junk to a sorting office, where they would be reused or repurposed. The close-knit plan of these floating settlements would make it conceivable to utilize driverless vehicles and rambles to form conveyances, as well as a shared course for traveler travel utilizing as it were feasible modes of transportation. For the challenges, to build up a floating city. One critical impediment would be initial development costs, though it would be economically efficient for further future. Another calculated concern is the address of political specialist. In the event that it would serve as partitioned boroughs or expansions of major terrain cities. Be that as it may, it's hazy precisely how the drifting cities would be administered. Although there are still numerous obstacles on the way to making floating cities a reality, the extent looks for to challenge and, ideally, eventually fathom numerous of our climate and lodging situations. Conclusion. As a result, it shows up that with respect to growth of population in world cities and land deficiency and insufficiency of vitality supply sources with the major of natural crises. Considering this on imperative note that 71% of land is enveloped by water and the human might advantage the floating cities for domestic establishment of such cities is economical and such cities supply their essentialness through sun, water, and wind, that these energies are not dangerous for environment and the human in such cities may experience the superior and more profitable environment. Changeability of floating cities may count from its advantage in such a way that on the off chances that the human should utilize sea or make such cities, it is conceivable easily. Advancement and establishment of coasting cities is uncommonly quick and straightforward, and such places are separable normally. Also, it is guaranteed from shock while seismic tremor, as well it has an exceptional environmental benefit that acts as an energy-efficient life on ocean, and it appears as if the short run of globe would be on the environmental recuperation. Considering that their area brings perceptible scene from water in encompass and supplies the appropriate put for sport, water exercises, and recreational equipment, that all the said things are at the side increase in social welfare. In spite of the fact that it may have certain impediments, thus it can lead to the ideal future approaches.